and welcome to RCA Radio, a podcast where we cover the latest news and challenges in regulatory, compliance, and quality assurance facing the life science industries. I'm your host, Brandon Miller. In this episode of RCA Radio, we'll be looking at the compounding pharmacy industry and the issues they face in the evolving regulatory landscape. Today, I'm joined by Anita Michael and Arie Anahory. Would you both be so kind to give us some background of your experience?
Sure. My name is Anita Michael. I'm an executive principal consultant with RCA. I specialize in pharmaceutical manufacturing and preparation for approvals globally.
And my name is Arie Anahory. I am the global head of operations here at RCA, and I have been with RCA for 10 years. And in those 10 years, I have managed and overseen our programs for our compounding companies. And it's great to be here, Brandon.
Thank you both for joining me. Today, we're going to cover what makes compounders stand out compared to their traditional pharmaceutical counterparts, why they're important for the market overall, and the challenges they are facing getting established, and finally, how compounding companies can prepare themselves to address those challenges. So to start off, for those listeners that don't know, what is a compounding pharmacy and how did compounding in medicine emerge in the industry?
Sure, Brandon. Pharmacy compounding is an industry that specializes in personalized medications. And it usually will help with special populations, ones that, the children, the elderly, or individuals that may not be able to access traditional medications. So pharmacy compounding specializes in preparing pharmaceutical products that are specially formulated to prevent, for instance, allergies, or a patient may have a hard time swallowing. And these products aren't readily available on the market.
And Anita, I can add to that too. So you have two types of drug compounders currently in our industry. The first one is 503As, and they're compounding pharmacies that compound according to prescriptions, specific or particular to patients. And those are actually required by state boards of pharmacy to comply with the USPs and other guidelines. And then we also have 503B companies, which are also known as outsourcing facilities, and they manufacture large batches with or without prescriptions, often over state borders to larger populations, and are sold to healthcare facilities.
And to add to that, Arie, the 503B pharmacies and outsourcing facilities, they're mainly producing bulk production of medications for healthcare. And also they do produce these medications based on a drug shortage list, meaning that the drug is not readily available within the market for patients who need these critical treatments.
Yeah, absolutely, Anita. And what I'm seeing on the program lead side of things is over the last 10 years, you've definitely seen a difference, at least more scrutiny that's coming down on these 503B companies from the agency. So Anita, do you have any history there as to what has led to that?
Sure. So earlier in the 2000s, prior to about 2012, mainly the pharmacy compounders were not separated into 503A and 503B, and they were state regulated. After the New England Compounding Center incident, which I can tell you a little history about, around in 2012, there was an outbreak of a fungal meningitis. And at that time, the FDA, the agency, and the state traced back that national outbreak to a New England Compounding Center, known as NECC, located in Massachusetts. So essentially, there were contaminated steroid injections that were shipped across state lines, and NECC resulted in sickening of approximately 800 people and had led to the deaths of more than 100 people. So they were found guilty and misleading of some information. So at that time, the state and the agency started to work intimately together to regulate the pharmacy compounding industry. Hence, we had increased regulations and oversight over the 503As and 503Bs that have resulted and continue today.
Wow, it sounds like there is some very recent history with compounders, and it sounds like they are just starting to get on their feet here in the industry. So with that being said, what makes a compounder different than a traditional pharmaceutical company, and why are they so important in the evolving healthcare industry?
So Brandon, I can help out that one. So why is compounding important? Well, compounding has always traditionally been important because it's a personalized medication and it's individualized to the patient needs. And compounding is also crucial for children, elderly, again, ones that are unable to take liquids. And today, a lot of them do produce specialized injectables. Compounding also helps with the drug shortage. They fill the gaps in the supply chain. Medications that are not commercially readily available within the market or have been discontinued, the pharmacy compounding industry can fulfill those prescriptions at that time.
Yeah, and I think too, Anita, what we're seeing, right, is there really is becoming a shorter gap between the difference of your traditional drug manufacturer and the 503B compounders. A little bit because of the history there that Anita just mentioned, but also to ensure product safety and patient safety. So, what's the difference, Brendan? I think there's a little bit of a difference there in the application of the approved product. That currently drug manufacturers do have to submit an application, which differs then from a 503B. Anita, did you want to add anything there?
Sure. So in a traditional pharmaceutical company, even for OTCs, there are tier 1 and tier 2 applications that have to be put into the agency. And also they need to follow a traditional monograph. If we look at our prescription drugs, they would usually fall under 2 categories: an ANDA, an abbreviated new drug application, or an NDA, a new drug application for a pivotal drug treatment. Here in pharmacy compounding, that is not required, okay? They are not required to submit an NDA, ANDA, or a tier 1, tier 2 application for OTC. So mainly their regulatory and compliance areas are inspections. So it's very important that they meet the 211 GMPs. And some of the areas now that pharmacy compounders are required to have are, for example, full equipment qualification. They need to have intense sterile processing validation. They need extensive stability studies, robust EMPQ program. And an EMPQ program is essentially qualifying your facility fit for use and also wrapping up a very strong and robust environmental and personnel monitoring program.
Yeah, which, going back to those 503As, those are regulated by the state boards of pharmacy, and we're not seeing that stringent compliance initiative put on those smaller compounders today. Right, Anita? So we are seeing those 503Bs having more challenges meeting those regulations because of the gap right now with some of those challenges that, are put forth by the agency today.
Yes, exactly, Arie. 503As were and are regulated by the state, right? They do follow traditional USP 797, and I know they leverage some of the FDA guidance documents that are out. FDA has also published a lot of 503A guidance documents for hospitals that receive 503A products. There's one that's called the Hospital and Health System Compounding under Section 503A of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. But to your point, the 503Bs are required to follow the 211 GMPs, and those GMPs are quite extensive. Also, the agency will conduct inspections based on a risk-based analysis. So if they're making injectables or they're making terminalized, sterilized products or large amounts of medications for the market, they are required to be inspected. So yes, the 503As are handled by the state. However, the FDA will work with the state for companies that, may have compliance issues in the 503 area.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a good point, Anita.
So clearly these compounders are here to stay as they help fill a gap that traditional pharmaceutical companies are unable to address, but that comes with their own challenges. So to build off that, what are some of the major challenges compounders are facing today, and how can they address these challenges?
So, Brendan, I think some of the areas that 503 facilities are facing difficulties or hurdles are when they go from being a 503A to moving to a 503B. At that point, they really need to work with a third-party consulting team that can help to design and build their stability studies, their process validation, supplier qualifications, smoke studies, gowning, EMPQ, and also cleaning validation will come into play. And one of the areas that the 503B companies have struggled with and also continue to receive 483 warning letters and also state citations is with the aseptic processing area. Some of the areas in there are microcontamination in the ISO 5 and 7 for controls. Particulate samplings aren't readily taken at the right areas with the frequency needed. Viable monitoring is improper, and adequate personal monitoring is deficient. Another area would be the visual inspections companies struggle with. So they're common 483 observations, warning letters, and also the state Board of Pharmacy citations for these areas.
Yeah, and just some data to kind of back up what Anita had just relayed to us is between April 2023 and April 2025, unfortunately, the US FDA issued 10 warning letters to compounding pharmacies, both directed at 503As and Bs. And kind of along the lines, these citations included a lot of these items that Anita had just mentioned. And Anita, I do kind of want to call out one that stands out to me and kind of what we see on the day-to-day is that human element of, the aseptic process and how, there is a lot of control that needs to be in place for that specific process. And this is definitely one of the things that separates a true 503B from some drug manufacturers. And what have you seen, Anita, a good 503B kind of put in place for this aseptic process and maintaining that human element of the manufacturing or production of the product?
Sure. I think it's a three-prong approach. The first is looking at your aseptic processing, whether you're doing sterile filtration or terminal sterilization, that you work for a validation process where you're verifying filters and that you're verifying your actual operating parameters and determining whether you have robust validation processes across family product lines. And then also designing, developing, and keeping in control a proper EMPQ program and a cross-contamination control strategy in place. So those are some of the areas. And then for employees, of course, the aseptic technique comes into play. Right now, a lot of companies are using open RABs, some form of robotics, but quite often there is to your point, the human element involved in some of those processing steps. So they definitely need to be controlled, and then having a really strong and good testing. You should have an excellent supplier qualification program for all your materials. And then you should have proper in-processing and finished product testing and a robust stability program to support the expiration date, especially under 503B products that are released.
Yeah, Anita, all good points. And, to just transparently, some of the items that we see coming out of our 503B customers is they don't have this expertise in-house to kind of provide that guidance for either that aseptic program or the supplier qualification program or understanding of, true quality's role within a 503B that differs from a 503A. Which is, of course, where you can always reach out to industry groups such as PDA or, of course, reach out to, your local consulting firm or RCA to help you better understand where your current gaps are within your day-to-day so you can meet those compliance needs and also fill those gaps that are, kind of those skeletons in the closet.
And to wrap things up and to address all of the challenges that you both have mentioned, what would be your most critical piece of advice you would give to a company looking to get into the compounding industry or an established compounder looking to bring their process up to speed within the evolving regulatory landscape?
Anita, I'll go first on this one, and you can bring in the technical side if you like.
For sure.
So my advice would be to be proactive in your approach to meeting the compliance requirements. If you're an A to a B, or if you're looking to acquire a site and you'd like to start compounding at that site, certainly be proactive. Give yourself enough time to get the correct processes, procedures, personnel in place. Sometimes leveraging an outsourced or outside expert would certainly help, but I would most definitely always do a proactive gap assessment as well, so you understand where your gaps are and where you can improve. And then, always be up to date with the newest and latest and greatest from the agency and what's currently happening in the industry, including, reviewing any warning letters or 43s that are released so you can continue your compliance initiatives, and also involving yourself in industry groups.
So yes, I think those are all the main points. And then I'd like to touch on the proactive point of it. It's always good to partner with a company like RCA because pharmacy compounding is so highly regulated. And right now you really need to have a well-designed six-system QMS program in place. And then also have the records and have the training, and also have conducted some mock inspections so that you can be ready and you can know your gaps, because you don't want to get behind a long and intense 483, which often will lead to warning letter and also can lead to additional regulatory actions by the agency or recalls.
That is some very valuable advice for our listeners. And I'd like to thank you both for taking the time to talk about these compounding pharmacies and their importance in the industry, as well as some of the challenges they're currently facing. I'd also like to thank our listeners for tuning into this episode of RCA Radio. Be sure to subscribe to be the first to know when we upload the next episode of RCA Radio. Thanks again and have a great day.